along the path to becoming a $25 trillion high-income economy by 2047. Any guesses who our next guest is? All right. I already revealed that Rahul's going to be doing the session, so this session will be moderated by Rahul Kanwal, of course, who will be joining us shortly. And our guest is none other than Børge Brende, President at the World Economic Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, they'll be joining us shortly. Let me tell you a little bit more about our next guest. Børge is the president of the World Economic Forum and former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Norway. From 2011 until becoming the minister, he was a managing director at the World Economic Forum in Geneva. And it is our absolute pleasure to now welcome Børge. And this session, like I said, will be moderated by none other than Rahul Kanwal. A huge round of applause, please.
There is so much talk in India about the emergence of our country in the years to come, potentially as the third largest economy in the world. And there are very few people who travel quite as much and have as much of an outside-in exposure on what's happening in India relative to what's happening in the rest of the world than the president of the World Economic Forum, Børge Brende, who's here. Thank you very much, Børge, for joining us at the Business Today India at 100 Summit. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us. Thank you.
No, thank you for inviting me, and great to see you again. I saw you're in great shape in the conversation with Brad Smith, so...
You know, if anybody could have followed that scintillating conversation with Brad Smith, it has to be Børge. So he's a great friend of India, and we're absolutely delighted to have you here with us. Børge, could we start this conversation by you laying out how you see the India story at the World Economic Forum in a global context, given all that's happening in the world at this moment in terms of geopolitics, in terms of economics? Where do you see India relative to how Indians see the India story? How do you at the World Economic Forum, as its presidents, see what's happening in India right now?
So India has come out of the COVID in a much stronger position than many other countries. It is a fact that India is now the fastest growing of the big economies, but it's not once off. It's for the third year in a row that India is the fastest growing economy. So congratulations on that. And congratulations on being successful in landing on the south pole of the moon.
That's very nice. Thank you.
I think
that's something that all Indians are very proud of.
Yeah, but I think it really shows that India is really, it's a staggering change going on in this country. And I was reflecting on why is this. I think it started in a way also with this digital ID. Maybe it was controversial at the beginning, but you know, to have the largest population in the world, 1.4 billion people, all have a digital ID, is a prerequisite for a lot of other things, and that is digital connect. Most of Indians are now digitally connected. I was just seeing on TV a few weeks ago, it was a grandmother up in Assam sitting there on her cell and wiring money to the grandchildren on her cell. Where is that happening other places in the world, in a developing country that is an emerging economy. And the fact that you have then demographic dividend that will be positive for you probably 30 to 40 years to come, no shrinking of the workforce. And if the workforce is digitally connected and knows how to operate, huge opportunities.
India this year is the president of the G20, and Prime Minister Modi will be hosting the Big Leaders Summit in early September. How do you see India's presidency? PM Modi has just given Business Today an exhaustive interview, his first on the G20, where he sees the G20 emerge as a catalyst for a new global order. And there's a lot of talk about emerging as a leader of the global south, sitting in the north, Norway and in Switzerland. How do you see India's efforts at trying to be a catalyst in establishing a new global order? Børge?
As you know, Rahul, Switzerland is also a neutral country, so Switzerland is dealing with all the different players and actors. But it is true that there is a new order. It's definitely the post-Cold War order is not anymore there. But I think we are between orders. We don't exactly know what the new order is. But there are fundamental economic changes going on, and that we do know. So the economists at the World Economic Forum also definitely are saying that India will become the third largest economy in the world in a couple of years. So you're bypassing Germany and Japan, and it will be then the US, China, the so-called G2. But my prediction, and I coined this for you here today, I think in a decade we will be faced with a G3.
Wow, that's interesting. Can we have a round of applause, please?
And
this is the first time I'm hearing of G3.
Yeah, the G3 is the US, China, and India. And that is a new reality. So far, India has not really leveraged its strength in the global geopolitics. India has been a little bit shy about that. I think what Prime Minister Modi is showing now is that India will also play a more important role when it comes to shaping the new order. And the new order needs to mean that the global south will have more influence. It will need to also be reflected in the UN, in the Bretton Woods institutions, and the new institutions. So I think India has a lot of influence with the so-called global swing states.
I haven't heard the articulation of this idea of a G3. It's a very powerful idea that you've laid forward. Are you just saying that, Børge, because you're in India and you're catering to this domestic constituency, and as an erstwhile politician, you want to say what they want to hear? Or do you actually believe that in the manner in which this new world order is emerging, in the manner in which a new India is being built, that a G3 is indeed possible? There is a new world order.
So if you coin something in the days of Twitter or X, or if you do it on a TV show, it's not like that it's kept in India anymore. Things do spread very fastly. So I think with using this term G3, I think I have to be able to also argue for it, and in other places. It will probably come up even in Davos. Doesn't mean that G3 is the only dimension. I think the G3 is showing that there are going to be three really strong economies. India is already then contributing this year probably to 16% of the global growth. That shows already that the 3 trillion economy that I think will grow into a 10 trillion economy in the coming decade is already having a lot of influence. I think that in addition to the G3, I think Europe still plays an important role, but that is as the EU. It's still the largest market in the world, the single market. But also, Africa is growing at an exponential level. The Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is for 1.5 billion people. Extremely powerful, and I think with Prime Minister Modi, when he also insisted on inviting the African Union, I think both to the BRICS, but also to the G20, was showing visionary leadership, because Africa and Latin America are growing very fast in addition to ASEAN.
You know, you're estimating a $10 trillion economy by 2033, and that's a very bullish estimate. There are aspects of the India story which are very promising. And yet, there have been things that happen in India that may frustrate you or make you tear your hair apart in terms of reforms that you'd like or things that you'd like to happen a certain way. Do you want to spend a moment on that? At this moment, what more would you like to see India do to be able to grow faster, to develop faster, and to be a bigger player in the international world trade order?
So, to grow faster, if you grow 8%, it's a bit hard. Of course, China at once grew at 10%. I think India can grow 8 to 10%. I think it's more on a question, how can that continue? How can you sustain that growth for the coming decade? And I think then you have to continue with reforms. Countries that stop reforming will also stop growing at that level. So every year there will need to be a new reform agenda. I think a prerequisite for the growth that we have seen is the digital connections, and also the fact that you're able, and that will be a big surplus, because I'm worried that we can move into a decade of low growth if we don't get it right now. We're seeing that growth is seriously slowing in Europe. We see that growth is also slowing in China and even have some deflation. If we don't continue to trade with each other and have a win-win approach, I think we can have a repetition of the 70s. That was a lost decade when it came to growth. 10 years with low growth. But why am I partly bullish that we can avoid this? And that is related to the new technologies. I think not only AI, but also big data, the changes in biology, we see it also in the health area. I think those new technologies will increase the productivity. We will produce even higher up in the value chain. And I think that can potentially lead to the necessary growth stimulus in the global economy. Of course, some people are afraid, oh, we will lose our job because AI. But you know, since the Industrial Revolution, all new technologies kill some jobs, but they lead to new and more interesting jobs higher up in the value chain, and you can get more prosperous. This time, India is not losing out on a new industrial revolution. I think if India gets it right, you can even drive the fourth industrial revolution. You see manufacturing is coming into this country. You also see that it's not only the back office of the world anymore, it can even be the front office. But then the government has to not get complacent. It has to then continue with the reforms. You have to invest more in the infrastructure. You have to invest more also in education. You have to invest more in research and development. That's where the new tax base will, and the tax and revenues will have to be invested in what can increase your competitiveness. And the digital IDs and all this has led to increased revenues from taxes without increasing the tax levels. This is incredible, but no, invest in the future, not in the past.
You know, the World Economic Forum has been at the forefront of ideating and innovating on the fourth industrial revolution, and that's been one of your big ideas at Davos, which your founder, Klaus Schwab, is very personally passionate about. Do you want to share with this audience here how you see the fourth industrial revolution play itself out in the Indian context? Because India has missed out initially on account of British colonialism and later on account of the country not being equipped at that moment on some of the previous industrial revolutions. How do you see the fourth industrial revolution story play out from all the frameworks and parameters that you've drawn?
So first, let me come back to where we are today. Globally, there are 4 billion people that are not adequately digitally connected. India is not in that group anymore because you have 1.4 billion people that are digitally connected. You know, maybe not all 1.4 billion, but a lot of them. So there you have like a positive dividend. So this time, India has a good opportunity to benefit from this new revolution. As I mentioned, no, India has to be fast in implementing these new technologies. AI is changing the way you operate. If you can then choose to let AI take on some of the back office's role, or you can have it supporting you to be more effective, I would take it on and then be more effective, and then you can use the skills and the labor to other things that do pay more off. For those that are like, you know, it was for those that stick to the sailboats when there are other ships there, they lost. So it's really, really important now to bring it on. I think one of the challenges India has, though, is the skills gap. There needs to be a lot of upskilling, reskilling, and right skilling, because there are no more jobs in this area than there are skills. So that skills gap has to be closed, because you need to then have the right people to go into these jobs.
No, but do you see that as a threat for a country like India? It could be an opportunity if you're able to up your skill game. But the fact that the quality of the higher educational institutes that we have aren't necessarily producing en masse top-end computer engineers or scientists or AI programmers. Instead, you're producing a bunch of generalists, some of whom may be super specialists at the very cutting edge of what's happening in Silicon Valley, in the US and in India, but a lot of them, which means potentially, do you see, we've already seen from McKinsey and from several other top corporates, estimates of job losses running into the hundreds of millions.
So as I said, in all industrial revolutions we have gone through, there has been jobs in the past that will be replaced by technology. Those that are slow in implementing and hugging the new technologies will not do so well. These countries will then have lower growth than those countries that embrace the new technologies, are first movers and fast movers, and they will then get more interesting jobs and they will do better. You know, it is not a priori given that if you do well today, that you're guaranteed to do well tomorrow. After the Second World War, Argentina was probably the second or third richest country in the world. It took 10 years, and they were a lower middle income country. Look at Kenya and South Korea. In 1960, they had the same GDP per capita. Today, South Korea has 30 times the GDP per capita than Kenya. So this also shows that India has huge opportunities if you continue the reforms, don't get complacent, invest the additional revenues now in upskilling, better education, research and development. When you can land this thing on the south pole of the moon, you can also get a much better primary education, secondary education, upgrade your universities, invest in all these areas. I think another thing, since you also, Rahul, asked about reforms, I think there is a bit of reforms potential still on the red tape in this country. You need to be world-leading in setting up businesses, getting away from unnecessary bureaucracy. Of course, you have to have rules and regulations, but it should not take a long time if a young person has an idea, wants to commercialize it, set up this. It takes too long still to get these things done. And that, I think, will be a part of the next reforms that will come. And there has to be a reform agenda every year. And then I'm very bullish on this.
That's a very important point you make. You also mentioned how countries like Argentina crashed economically in a matter of a few years. And that's where leadership becomes very important. Because in the hands of the right leaders, like China had in the 70s and the 80s, you can uplift millions of people from poverty. In the hands of the wrong leadership, a country can suffer economically. You've had many an opportunity to meet Prime Minister Modi. How do you, Børge, compare the leadership, personality, and approach of Prime Minister Modi with the cross-section of leaders that you meet internationally?
So India has a leadership under Prime Minister Modi that has been persistently introducing reforms. So, of course, some of the benefits is we're seeing on, for example, the digital ID, that is also coming from former governments. That's for sure. But this government has shown business friendliness. I think also the results speak for themselves. So we don't, in the World Economic Forum, get involved into party politics and all this, and I know there is an upcoming election, but you asked me about the discussions I have had the privilege to have with the Prime Minister, and I feel that the Prime Minister really cares and understands also the business environment and how important that is for India, and the result speaks for itself. India is fast growing. But no, you have to secure that also for the coming years.
Børge, how do you see the economic situation in China? We're seeing a lot of signs of potential economic distress. China is one of the major engines of the global economy and a prime driver of growth, or at least has been in the last couple of decades. What's your reading of where the China economic story goes from here, sir?
So it's complex. First, one has to congratulate China for all what they have achieved since they started to open up their economy in 1979 with Deng Xiaoping. You know, 1 billion people are lifted out of extreme poverty. They have a GDP per capita now around $10,000 US. They're almost the same size of their economy as the US. China is now around 20% of the global economy. When the reforms started, they were 1.5% of the global economy. So that is exceptional. I think for China now, they have made a lot of investments in infrastructure, in real estate, and they have based their growth model on an export-led growth. I think they're now seeing that the infrastructure investments have to, in the future, be cost-effective. They have invested too much in infrastructure. They have an overinvestment in real estate. And they're seeing that they also have to pivot now from export-led growth to also more domestic growth. And they have a huge home market. But that pivoting will, of course, take some time. And that's where they are in the middle of these reforms now. And it will be important for China to go through those reforms to again see growth back, maybe not where it was, but higher than today. And also, the situation with the US is not ideal for China, because these two economies are big, and you see that manufacturing is some manufacturing is moving out of China to Vietnam, India, because you see a diversification of the value chains. So China will also now is facing a situation where they have to incentivize more FDIs.
At the core of the World Economic Forum is the idea and philosophy of free trade internationally. In the geopolitical and economic tensions that are building up, are you seeing the inevitability of more trade barriers being erected internationally. You spoke of the economic tension between the United States and China. Do you see that increasing in the years to come with President Biden following up on and doubling down on the protectionist policies of Donald Trump? There's a big election in the US, and I know you don't want to talk about elections, but do you see this as being an irreversible trend, or do you see this as being a trend in the moment which need not be permanent?
I hope it's not a reversible trend, because we will pay a high price if we go into this decoupling and friendshoring, that you only buy from your friends. And who are your friends, though? Is Nigeria a friend? Is South Africa a friend? In my view, yes, but maybe that can change. I think you should buy where you get the best products to the best price, and we should continue to follow the competitive advantages of countries. But this notion of like just in time, just get the product 1 second before you need it into your value chain. This also just in case. I think we have to, I think it made sense to diversify a bit, but we should also be aware that the driver of the global growth the last decades, the engine behind this has been trade. And if you lose the baby with the bathwater, it has in that respect, and you just trade with yourself or some countries that you like, that will lead to a very dramatic situation when it comes to the global GDP. We think that total decoupling will shave off 8 to 10% of the global GDP. And we haven't had ever a depression that has shaved off that much. Then we're in a serious trouble, serious trouble. That's why I don't think that will happen. We have Secretary Raimondo of Commerce going to China, starting her visit on Monday. I think there will be areas where the G2 will not trade with each other. I think, for example, with semiconductors that are very sophisticated in the cyberspace area, products that have dual use, military and civilian, I think you will see less trade. But maybe that's 10% of the current trade between China and the US. 90% can continue as in the past. So I hope that we will continue with this kind of win-win thinking. That's also what is going to drive global growth in the years to come. I think, in my view, that is common sense, but common sense is not necessarily that common.
Børge, you come from Europe, and one of the biggest concerns in Europe is the continuing war between Russia and Ukraine. Everyone thought at some point in time the war would end one way or the other. It seems to be dragging on with no immediate end in sight and no seeming way for Vladimir Putin to get off the war ramp. How do you see the Russia-Ukraine war pan out from here? And what impact do you think this is having on the global economy? Has it largely been factored in, or is this, because WEF spends a lot of time focusing on global risk, is this still, in your view, a big global risk where you don't know where the war goes, what turn it takes from here?
So I definitely can say that the war will end. All wars have ended. But of course, we don't know how and when. I hope the war will end sooner and not later. It has big implications on soaring. It has led to soaring agriculture food prices globally, as we know, and it can again lead to a lot of increases in food prices in the year and years to come. Secondly, it has affected global energy prices, and we know that Europe is paying high price for no LNG gas that has replaced the cheaper Russian gas. When Europe is then paying so high price for LNG, it means that other countries, emerging economies that also has based themselves on import of LNG, they cannot compete with the prices that Europe still can pay, so they are also suffering from this. So hopefully we will see an end to this war. Of course, that end needs to be based on the principles that we all have agreed on the United Nations Charter, that is basis for dialogue and communication between countries. So let's see how this will pan out. I see it as a risk, but you know, it will be interesting to see what the coming year will bring of possible solutions to this war. That's extremely unfortunate.
Do you want to spend a moment talking about the regulation of artificial intelligence? Because you've got national concerns where everybody wants to be in charge of data, every country wants its own laws, and yet a lot of the changes are very global. We've seen India in the last parliament session come out with a new data privacy law, which is several years late already. It doesn't focus much on AI, whereas that's the law that we need at this moment. But there's a lag between needing a law and the law coming through a consultative process and ultimately getting implemented. What are the ideas you have at the World Economic Forum about how AI should be regulated?
I'm happy to answer that. Maybe just say 2 words about why this is so complicated because of the geopolitics. So in a fractured world, fragmented world, where there is a lot of competition, we barely can agree on anything. The UN Security Council is very toxic, and they used to agree on a lot of stuff, but not anymore. But the paradox is that still some of the major challenges that we are faced with globally, they travel without a passport. And if they travel without a passport, it means that the only way to deal with it is that more than one country come together and agree on some rules and regulations that is in the interest of humankind. So after the Second World War, we were able to agree on non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. We, of course, know that terrorists and other unfriendly nations should not have access to nuclear weapons. Now coming to AI. I think AI, artificial intelligence, the new technologies, also quantum computing, has a lot of potential benefits. We have not seen that any of the technology breakthroughs have not been good for the world. It has replaced some manual work. We have then increased our prosperity. And you know, the world is in a very good shape in that respect. But we also know that AI, if it's not controlled, if it comes in the hands of the wrong people, it can influence a lot of our systems in a negative way. So that's why I do hope that even in the polarized world, at least in a G20 context, and I see the G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant has just arrived. I hope that in the G20 context, at least we can establish a floor when it comes to AI. So China and the US can say, of course, we will compete on being the best on AI, being the best on quantum computing, because that is at the core of this competition between China and the US now. They both know that the nation that is on top of the new technologies will emerge out of this century as the most influential nation. That competition can be good, it cannot be so good, but they need to agree on some traffic rules. Imagine the traffic in Delhi is already bad, but if without any traffic rules, it will be total chaos. So I look at AI regulation as traffic in New Delhi. It will not change overnight, but some basic traffic rules, even the drivers in Delhi do comply with, and that's what we need for AI.
You know, if you come from Norway and Switzerland, despite having traffic rules, what you see on the roads can feel like utter chaos. But I want to tell everyone sitting here and those watching across the Business Today multiverse that we've just witnessed a landmark session. And this will be spoken of for many months and years to come, because you heard for the first time, in my view, the construct of a G3 being laid out. And this is very significant because this hasn't been spoken of earlier. From the president of the World Economic Forum, the idea that in 10 years from now, India will be a $10 trillion economy by 2033, and that the global order will be restructured in a way that the world will talk about G3, the United States, China, and India. That's an important idea which you've laid out. You're saying you'll build on this at the World Economic Forum at Davos next year, and this is the first time you've spoken about it. And as he said, he'll be challenged and questioned when he goes to Europe or he goes to Africa or he goes elsewhere about the idea of the prospect and the promise that India holds. You've also laid out the challenges. I said at the beginning that Børge is a great friend of India, and he just explained why. He also said it's not because of his friendship, but because of the conviction that they have about how the India story is shaping up from here. Can we have a very warm round of applause as we thank Børge Brende, President of the World Economic Forum, for having come to the Business Today India at 100 Summit. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Pleasure. I think they just want to take a photograph.
Thank you so much, Børge. Before you leave, you've already helped me with the introduction of the next session. A huge round of applause, please. I'd also like to invite Siddharth Zarabi, Managing Editor, BT TV, to express a token of our gratitude to Børge. A huge round of applause, please. Honestly, I'm running out of cloud storage space, taking down notes from Rahul's sessions. So much to take away, so much happening in the comment section on our social media platforms and all across the Business Today multiverse. We're going to move on to our next session, which is aptly titled Towards Achieving Global Leadership. In this session, we will focus on India's role in the global economic landscape and the steps needed to establish itself as a global leader. The session will be moderated by none other than Saurabh Majumdar, editor, Business Today. And I'd like to invite him on stage along with our esteemed guests for the next session, Amitabh Kant, India's G20 Sherpa. Can we have a huge round of applause for our next session?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm privileged to have with me the man who is driving this entire G20 and B20 meetings which are taking place today and over the next few days in Delhi, and has been doing so over the last almost a year, Mr. Kant, across the country, and in very interesting destinations across the country with Jan Bhagidari, with participation from the people. Now this is very, very different from many other G20s, may I add, because this has the feeling of a national festival. We have been able to make G20 a truly national participative festival. And I will start off, I know Mr. Kant is very, very busy. He's taken time off from other engagements during the day. I would like to start off, Mr. Kant, by getting your thoughts on how you think India has conceived this presidency and this whole participative sort of celebratory mode with which this is happening, and then we will come to specific aspects of it.
Normally when G20 presidency is held, it is held in one city or two cities across the country. It has never been held, in any other country, it's never been made into a people's presidency. So the Prime Minister, who's really the leader of G20 during India's presidency, decided that we will host the G20 in every state of India. And G20 is very different from, say, doing a World Cup in football, which was held in Qatar for 21 days. Very different from doing the cricket World Cup, which is 15 days, you know. This is through the year. So the Prime Minister decided that let us take G20 to every state of India. So we took it to 60 cities of India. And we used this opportunity to transform these 60 cities in terms of their infrastructure, drainage, sewage, solid waste, everything. The second thing we've done is that we've involved the citizens of India in hosting model G20s, essay contests, a whole range of issues. So this was the first time that foreign policy and diplomacy of India was taken to the people of India. And that's what's made G20 very different. It's a people's presidency and remarkably different from any other G20 held anywhere else.
Yes, Mr. Kant, and remarkably different in many other ways, if I may also add, because we had recently, earlier this week, the privilege of meeting the Prime Minister. The issue is here, which has been unveiled earlier.